And Vince, you can take it away when it starts.
Well, I see we're still connecting and we're good to go. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for those emojis. We need them. We need support. It's a rainy day here in Boston, very cool. And it's a pleasure to see that we have 50 people joining to meet the TAB, the Technical Advisory Board. And I thank you for coming. We have about a half an hour to discuss things, and I would love it to be an interactive discussion. These are the folks who are on the TAB presently, and we meet just about every month. And I don't know if you got to see the opening session, but I did have some photos at the end which take the TAB way back almost 20 years, in the sense that the people who were really thinking about the code base for microarrays recognized that they should get together and talk and do things together instead of in a separate way. And now things have changed so much that there's a lot of compartmentalization and siloing, and our monthly meetings aren't really enough to make sure that we all understand what each other are doing, that our tools can actually interoperate really effectively and build strength. So this is what the TAB tries to do, to get people together to move the whole project forward. And to get involved with the TAB is a changing process. And in fact, I think it's opening up very nicely, thanks to work that Martin Morgan started a few years ago on improving the governance and identifying the different structures of interactive units and people that make up the project. And so the idea that there will be technical working groups that are engaged with the TAB or the Community Advisory Board or both to help move aspects of the project forward is going to become a live component of the bioconductor project. And so you'll have the opportunity to think about working groups, suggest them, lead them, and then get exposure through the project for the products of that working group. And to let us know what you think, there's a Slack channel, Technical Advisory Board, or you can just contact any one of us. And if you'd like to really get involved, you want to get on the monthly calls, you can nominate yourself once a year. We have nominations, or you can ask someone to nominate you, I think. And that gets all kinds of publicity. We want the Technical Advisory Board to be a diverse and vibrant body. And I think we're accomplishing that to a certain extent, and we want that to continue. Now, there's a stated purpose of the TAB somewhere on the website, and it includes developing strategies to ensure long-term technical suitability of core infrastructure. Well, that's a mouthful. And I think, the strategy concept comes out all the time, and how to develop strategies to make the core infrastructure work is a great idea. What is the core infrastructure? And I started to dig into that a little bit in the opening session, because there's the code, right? There's 2,000 packages, which are the software for bioconductor. But then there's this deeper base, which actually allows us to assemble, build on different platforms. And one of our technical questions should be, what are we going to do about the M1 Mac? Is that going to be another platform that we're going to be responsible for checking and submitting binaries, making them available, and so on? That's a big question. But then the deeper infrastructure, the actual code bases for summarized experiment or genomic ranges and so on, which of these should be looked at with tremendous care in terms of reliability, stability, and so forth? Those are the kinds of things that I think need strategy for long-term technical viability. And the TAB and the core are trying to move in the direction of having good answers for those. So project usability and value to the scientific community. How do you figure that out? Is there a question of market share? And should we be present in places where we're not yet present? How do we bring packages in, and how do we get them out? There are tools, there are procedures, and the TAB is thinking about making them better, or making it such that the effort required of the core to do these things is not so great, and they can spend more time on the technical difficulties of making the code work more efficiently, let's say. Then end user engagement, what kind of documentation, support site, and so forth. How is that functioning, and should it be changed in any way? What can we do in terms of developer support? That's a real concern for the technical advisory board, especially for the members of the board. How do we make sure that the code works so that they have a satisfactory development experience? It's not always straightforward. And then, packages that the community can use, well, yes, we're interested in that, and we do that. Technical and scientific aspects of funding strategies, that's where we have to talk to one another and say, listen, how do we get something that is so compelling that the government will reach into the taxpayer money and say, yes, please do this? And we do talk about that a fair amount, but ultimately it becomes something which is in a silo, because only so many people can write the grant and then actually get the funds and use them. So this is a challenging piece of our activity, and I think it's getting better. But that's one of the things we're concerned about. And we're often spend a fair amount of time on that topic, meeting to meeting. There's a meeting every month on the first Thursday, and there are governance documents and meeting minutes. So in a given meeting, you could have announcements and thinking about the minutes from the previous month. I like to do something called greatest hits. What did I see going on in the bioconductor project over the past month that I think we should all sort of be aware of and, emulate or extend? And that's difficult. There's so much going on, and my filters are, very clogged. So it's nice for people to be thinking about, hey, what's new? And there is a Slack channel called Humble Brag, which needs more content. When you do something or you see something, throw it out there so that we know about it. Funding opportunities we discuss. Yeah.
Vince,
yes.
There's a question from the audience that I'll throw up. So the question is, do we first need to be in the CAB to be nominated to get into the TAB, or what are the minimum qualifications?
Good question. It'd be nice to think about minimum qualifications, and the board may want to address this. I think we don't have any at the moment. There's nothing formally about it, and you certainly don't have to be on the community advisory board first. I do think that the technical advisory board has a voting process for its own renewal, and that's just the process that's in place now. If we get more interaction with people about what the TAB is and what it does, the mechanisms for populating the TAB may change over time. But at the moment, there's a nomination process and then an internal election process that determines who actually composes the TAB. I hope that's a good answer to your question. And just fire an email to me if it isn't clear and we need to clarify that more. So going back through an example meeting agenda, well, revisiting, yeah, so someone wants to tell me something. Let's just take a second and read the slides while I see what's going on here. Okay. There is not enough space. So this is our primary funding recipient, Rafa Irizarry, who has been in the project forever, and he is not able to get on stage. So Mike, maybe there's a way to jump the stage a bit.
Yeah. So if someone, there's just a limitation with the platform that we can only have 9 people on stage. There's more members of the TAB, and they're in the audience. And if somebody from the TAB wants to say something, just raise your hand and I'll rotate you on and kick somebody off the stage now.
Yes, and kicking them off is a figure of speech, of course. And welcome, Rafa. We would love to hear your comments about this. So an agenda could be, what is this core set of bioconductor packages? What do you think? And how do we manage them? And then a working group has been assembled to help us move the annotation hub into a new, maybe more functional form. What kinds of updates have there gone on to the absolute base infrastructure like S4 vectors or X vector or summarized experiment. And preparations for the next bioconductor release. Every 6 months, you get a new one. Update from the Community Advisory Board. That is an extremely vibrant and active group. And knowing what they are doing and how it can impact what we think about from a technical point of view is quite important. And a dean usually comes on board and has a slice of the time of the TAB meetings to let us know. And it's always, to me, a pretty overwhelming set of topics. And then we can have guest presentations on different technical aspects. So it's thought that, there's a core grant for bioconductor, although there's funding all over the place for it, specifically in Europe with Wolfgang Huber, and in Asia, as far as I know, the core grant in terms of the distribution that's going on and the contributions to the absolutely deep stack that gets the Git repositories in shape and brings in new people to get them reviewed and so forth, new packages. There's an NHGRI grant that we were able to renew for a 5-year period starting in March 2021. And Rafa and I are the MPIs of that. And I just thought I would go through the aims. We want to maintain availability and growth of the open source software and data ecosystem for modern genome biology. Keep it going. Then enhance reliability and performance of the core genome analysis infrastructure components through improved formal testing disciplines and modernization of continuous integration and continuous delivery methods of the project. The project began before CI/CD even existed. And it's a tribute to Rob Gentleman and Jeff Gentry and Jianhua Zhang to put together this system, which puts all the packages in a testing framework in a develop branch and a release branch, for a good 15 years at least, let's say. So we wanted to think about modernizing the approach that we're taking here to use the kinds of things that people are using much more routinely. It turns out not to be very straightforward, and we need to discuss that as a TAB and a core in a pretty protracted way. I think 5 years may be just enough time to figure out what we want to do. Advancing the development and deployment of data science genomic methods that leverage emerging cloud-scale computing and data service paradigms. Well, we do that also in conjunction with the Anvil project and other things. Data science genomic methods. And then education and community engagement processes that have been intrinsic to the project since its inception. So the core grant is aiming to do these things, and I think we're actually doing them pretty effectively with a relatively small budget and a relatively small group of people that are actually funded to do it. And thinking about how you match the throughput of the project, the targets of the project, to the actual resources is a challenging question, and I don't have good answers, but discussion is always important. Relationship between the TAB and the grant. So the TAB governance allows the grant PIs to be members of the TAB sort of without being elected. Well, we don't take advantage of that in any unreasonable way. What are the funds used for? Well, we could go through that, but I won't. Consider the mix between open source community contributions. So these are things which, because they're open, are generally, not paid for per se, but are done because they're collaboratively done in the open, but are maybe funded by something unrelated to the project that is the open source project. That's what open source is, as far as I know, although there are probably much better, clearer definitions of it. But then there's this institutionally funded service project, which is more of what we are here. The mix between what people are doing openly and then contributing to the project as contributed packages, let's say, or things that we didn't even think of, like code.bioconductor.org, the search facilities generated by Mike Smith over in EMBL. And the deep stack, which is what we really do need the funding for, to keep the machines going, to keep folks, building the Git infrastructure, dealing with the credentials and the content delivery and so forth that makes everything work. That's where a lot of this funding is going. And also to some of these scientific projects that relate to methodology of genome science. So that's what the core grant is about. And obviously, you can go to the NIH Reporter. I think I put links in. Well, I put the links in the opening session. So you can find out all about the grants that are related to bioconductor in the open. Now, we've grown a lot over the past 20 years, and so organizational structures and decision-making processes have to be made a little more reliable and stable. And inclusion and diversity are obviously important features. And I've always been kind of impressed by the fact that it is quite inclusive and diverse. The pictures that I showed, for example, show an interesting distribution of folks from in different facets. And of course, we want to improve that. And I think you'll be hearing about some new initiatives to do that in the near future. Also, we are interacting regularly with the Galaxy Project, which is a huge organization that distributes tooling and compute cycles all over the world to folks that are not computer programmers. And understanding how they do their governance has been really eye-opening. In fact, it was James Taylor, the late James Taylor, who came to one of our scientific advisory board meetings. It was 5 or 6 people. He said, "Where is everybody?" And I think that was a watershed moment where we said, you know, these guys are doing things very differently, and maybe we better understand how to do that. And we're still working on it. We're also going to be bringing in some consultants to help us with governance from an open source and charitable organization point of view.
There's a question from the audience, Vince, and I'll show it on screen from Sonali. Where can we find out about existing TAB topics? And this would be helpful to know if new people want to check if their topic is already part a group or if they should start a new one.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, I'm not even sure we have a good site, let's say, which lists the topics. Stephanie might mention that we have the working groups. Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you for the question. So I'm actively working with Lori to build a website where we document and list all open working groups, active working groups. And the definition of an active working group would be somebody who's committed to leading it. And then as that gets populated, then I will definitely mention it or link to it on the Bioconductor Slack workspace. For now, it's been about a week now that I've been working on it, and it's not quite ready yet. But hopefully the next week or two.
Yeah. And since that's on GitHub too, that would be a good place for people could also open issues if they had ideas to start new ones. We would list the plan at least was to list the currently active ones that we thought of that don't have a current leader that's would be considered non-active, but things that we've thought of, and then also a place to suggest new ones.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So Sonali, I would say get in touch with us via Slack, and we'll make sure the topics that you are interested in get moved into our space of discussion as soon as possible. And that's the case for anybody who's on this in this meeting.
But I mean, there's also plenty of issues that are worth spending time on that doesn't necessarily need formal stuff, right? I mean, the project has also always benefited a lot from sort of grassroots efforts from somebody just saying, I'm going to do something, and people use it, right? So, I mean, I don't think that you need to feel constrained in doing stuff and feeling that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, it's a bit of a puzzle because so much of what goes on in Bioconductor came in improvisation, if you ask me. No one said do it. But you needed it, and you did it in the open, and it came in.
Remember?
Another comment? Someone's breaking up a little bit. I hope it's not me. Anyway, type it in. I want to just make sure we cover all the different slides here. There's a lot, and it's already 12:05. So let's just quickly say that there's technical introspection, and there are questions that anybody could have an opinion about. How does the annotation hub working? Is BioC style doing what we want? Summarized experiments. And many people come up with wonderful ideas to elaborate these structures, and they come in, and the TAB is glad to have done it, but they didn't actually propose it. And that is certainly the case. But when it's getting done, one of the interesting things that goes on is that multiple people will try something at the same time. And that happened with the tree-structured experiment. And I think the TAB played a useful role in getting people who were going along the same paths or targeting the same thing, but along different paths, to harmonize their work and get something that is ultimately, I think, a better team-generated solution than would have been had they done them separately. Package review working group, a big deal, right? We get lots of package submissions, and we want to make sure that they are compatible with our ecosystem and that they meet the, I don't know, the goals that the developer would really like to meet. And so we have some experience there. We can often make good suggestions, and we do that as core members. It's a lot of work. It cuts into our development time. And so we've opened up the package review process. We are inviting people to come on board. We want to make sure that the reviews are of high quality, so there's a training process, but this is a big step forward in my view. The hubs. So these are widely used tools for getting experimental data, either to learn the biology or to develop new methods for, and annotation to figure out what is known about the genomic structures that you're actually studying. So these are very widely used. Many of the resources are community contributed, and there's a TAB working group focusing on this to see if we can make it work better. For example, can we have a community, let's say within a lab, that is sharing all the caches instead of having copies for each individual? Are there issues with access in certain countries? Are there cost concerns because we are actually paying as we distribute this data? Documentation, encouraging users to adopt curation of resources, and website exposure. Actually, Marcel has worked on a way of exposing all of the hub content without you having to do any programming to find out what's in there, and we should make that more evident. 12,000 new annotation hub resources. These numbers are large. I don't really know what they should be, but they're large. They're used. We need to keep it going. We need to make it better. Then the idea of a summit, where we get people together and get a number of people talking about things. We had a session on matrix methods because there are so many ways of dealing with large sparse matrices, and we'd like to make sure that whatever we want to do statistically can be done extremely efficiently. We have slides from this. We have a recording of it. But I think there's still work to be done to bring that to fruition. And it was a very nice overview to get people to see what's going on. We'd like to have scalability, machine learning, object-oriented programming summits, and we will let you know about those. There's a working group on spatial and multiomics, and there's the link. It's open to anyone who's interested in this field, and technical barriers, open problems are what we'd like to deal with there. I think this is the last slide. It's an extremely important one. A new committee devoted to education using the concepts of the carpentries. I personally have not been able to get engaged with this. I haven't had time. It's a fascinating set of disciplines for dealing with exactly the types of things that Bioconductor is trying to do for genome science. So I would open the floor to those who want to discuss this part of it more thoroughly. That's the end of the slides. And so you've met the TAB. You've gotten my overview of it. Many people contributed to these slides. I appreciate it, specifically Charlotte Sonneson. And that's what I have to say, and I welcome additional commentary, particularly on the education component.
Don't be shy. If you have any questions, now's your chance.
Maybe I can
either. Oh, go ahead.
Maybe I can say a few words about the education committee. We just had a workshop on lesson development, and the 3 lessons that we are working now on are written on that slide. So an introductory lesson to get newcomers going with R more generally and get them ready to start using bioconductor material. Another lesson to kind of introduce them on the many facets of the bioconductor project, and one about RNA sequencing. There is a lot of work to be done, and I think we are very open, and we have a Google group where we announce our monthly meetings. There is a Slack channel dedicated to training and education. And so if you have any interest or would like to contribute, feel free to get in touch with any of us in any way you want, on Slack, Google Group, or otherwise.
Well, if there isn't a major...
There's a question from Kevin. I'll throw it up on the stage. The TAB would probably be interested in proposing or overseeing, oops, it went away, one sec. Overseeing episodes for the BioC project lesson about the release cycle or build system.
BioC project lesson about the release cycle, the build system. I completely agree with that. That's sort of the, I'm going to stop presenting actually, because I don't think the slides are all that relevant. Well, they are, but we don't need to go through them again. This idea is what I call at the moment related to the deep stack. So there's a lot of stuff inside that the core team is managing to make this stuff work. The release cycle. How do you figure out, when to make a new release, and what kinds of conditions do you impose to make sure that the ecosystem is mutually consistent and ready for the next step? There's a data analysis problem there, and it's hard to get the data. What are the warnings that are being thrown? How can we help developers get their packages to green where there are no errors? What should BioC Check be doing and forbidding that developers are actually doing? So overseeing episodes for the BioC project lesson about the release cycle, the build system, from a developer's perspective, I'm all in favor of that. And if I weren't, completely maxed out, and all the other folks on the core weren't completely maxed out, I think we would look at this in the way that you're proposing, Kevin. But if you have some time and want to flesh out some thoughts about what it would look like, that would be appreciated.
And then there's another question from Nitesh. I'll throw it up on the screen. Regarding the education, is there a division into people who would create lesson plans versus the people who would teach?
My sense is, yeah, Adine seems to be answering there, but I think you're muted. Seems to be that yeah, she's saying there is no division, I think. Still muted.
You might have to refresh your browser. They were mentioning earlier.
I can confirm there is no division, and people will contribute whatever they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, it's very open, and the materials are out there, and you use them with attribution, and I think you're a teacher. I wanted to just mention one thing that the TAB should be thinking about, which is containerization. How can you use Docker in the build system and then hand out containers to the community developers so that they'd be able to replicate exactly what goes on in the build system? That is something we're shooting for, and I wonder, whether developers have a enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm for that sort of transition. We'll I see one thumbs up. That's great. Anyway, I think we're close to time, and I don't really want to run over. So
can I just touch on? So 18 commented in the chat and everything. There is a new program that we're trying to develop in collaboration with the CAB2. That's a mentorship program with the idea that people would volunteer, senior programmers as well as new developers, and we would try to pair people up with the idea of helping people work through a development of a new package and work in this mentor-mentee relationship. And it's in the early stages of development, and we have some documentation on it, and we'll talk more about it at the Meet the Cab session. But there is that also in the works and forthcoming.
Well, I think we have less than 30 seconds to go. So I just really want to thank the organizers and the TAB for being there and for keeping this project viable and useful to a very large community. So thank you so much for coming, and we hope to hear from you. Bye.
Great. So I'll end the session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Mike.